Yama. My name is Marley Silver. I'm a proud Aboriginal woman from the Gamilaroi and Dunghutti tribes of New South Wales. On behalf of the Imperfects podcast, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the country on which this podcast is created, and in this, honour the ways in which their elders past and present have cared for and nurtured their lands and waterways for millennia. I extend this acknowledgement to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people connected to each of the hundreds of countries that make up the continent of so-called Australia, and any of my brothers and sisters listening to this episode. I pay my respects to our leaders and knowledge keepers, past and present. Find strength in our survival for over 60,000 years, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. Always was, always will be.
Quick! Is anyone here a doctor? Yes, her name is Dr. Emily, and she's a psychologist. Please welcome to the Imperfects, our very own psychologist!
God, it gets better. It gets better.
Dr. M, welcome back to the Imperfects. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to see you all.
I was thinking of you the other day. I was driving through Ballin and I stopped to get a coffee over the road from Palace Ballin Cinemas, where we both had our first part-time job, where we met back in 1999, I think it was. And I found myself, I went back into the cinema and I wasn't there to see a movie. And I found myself telling a guy who worked there that I used to work there. And he was like an 18-year-old, like we were back then. And you've never seen a more disinterested human being in your entire life. And I imagined you and me like working there and me saying to you, this guy came up to me, he was a really old guy, and said, I used to work here. It's like, good stuff, mate, well done.
It'll be like, there'll be one day, maybe in like year 20 of the Imperfects, and we start like the Imperfects bus tour, and you can go around, go around to all like the significant locations. The Baldwin Palace Cinema will be top of the list.
But I want to let you know, Em, it smells exactly the same.
Oh, good.
Good?
That's well, I think it's good.
Popcorn.
Popcorn, surely.
Oh, popcorn, yeah. God, I love popcorn at the cinema.
Yeah. It'll surprise you to know that often it's bagged up at the end of the night and used. So when there's
reused.
So when there's popcorn, as Em could definitely tell you, she probably made more popcorn than I did in my time, but you would make the popcorn and then if it wasn't used, you'd put it in this massive bag, which is very funny to hit people with, like a massive bag full of popcorn.
Fun,
And then it goes back in the machine the next day and it's heated up. And whatever's left over is, so you could have popcorn there that Em and I made if you go there now. Because it's just like, there'll always be a bit, unless it's a Saturday night and you got Star Wars and Notting Hill at the same time, you don't really run out, you know.
Isn't that like...
Is that 1999?
Yeah, I remember my first ever shift. Em was there on my first shift and she was helping me, and it was Star Wars and Notting Hill. It was...
What a bumper weekend.
It's still the busiest. It's still the most stressed I've ever been in my entire life, I think.
Wow. Well, hopefully Dr. M can help you with your stress today. Dr. M, as people know, you go back through the archives of the Imperfects and you find episodes you'd like to give some sort of, as I say wrongly, professional thoughts on the episode. Which episode from our past would you like to talk about today?
I'd really like to talk about Sam Willoughby and his episode, which is incredible. So great. Moved and really uplifted by his by what he was talking about. So there's some stuff from that episode that I'd really be keen to kind of explore a little bit more.
Yeah, so Sam Willoughby, worth going back and listening, of course, to the episode, but was he an Olympian? He was an Olympian. Was he an Olympian? A former BMX rider, and paraplegic, and he came on and spoke about his story, the story of his accident and everything. And it is an incredible story. It is incredible. Okay, so what from that? Is there
so it's actually the clip that I wanted to play is actually not Sam talking, it's actually Hugh, but it's in reference to perhaps like I guess how you set up that episode and talking about the research behind the impact of significant events and our levels of happiness or our levels of well-being.
I just said great about the thing I'm about to say.
And then we can talk a little bit more about some other stuff after that and obviously reference that back to Sam's experience too.
Brilliant.
So if you've got that one ready, Josh, that'd be great.
the people who won Tats Lotto, their happiness and well-being went through the roof, went up really high. The people who just become paralysed, it just dropped, as you can imagine, dramatically. And they followed these people for the next couple of years, or I think it was the next 5 years. And what happened was,
I'm glad they did a follow-up, because I don't know if they needed to do any research to to come to that conclusion. It's like, you're not going to believe this, guys. You will not believe what we found. The people who won millions of dollars were happy, and the people who were in a serious accident were not. Anyway, I'll just leave that with you, because, thank God for science, huh?
Oh dear. And then what they did was they then followed, I think everyone knows this is heading, but over the course of 5 years, what happened, the people who won Tats Lotto, their happiness started to drop off again and go down again and go down, back to where it was, when before they'd won Tats Lotto. And at the same time, the people who'd become paralysed, their well-being went up and up and up and up. And there's a point where they actually cross over, and the people who won Tats Lotto, their well-being started to go down below where it was before they won Tats Lotto. And the people who'd been paralysed, their well-being continued to go up beyond the point they were before the accident, which is incredible research. And I think it really, when you listen to Sam talk, you kind of get a sense of how that can actually happen.
So I think that was a really great piece of research to bring up. And I thought it might be worthwhile exploring what's called hedonistic adaptation, or the hedonistic treadmill, which I really actually love the terms for those two things. And so, really kind of what that research was saying, and what a lot of research suggests, is that we have a relatively stable, kind of almost set point of happiness or well-being. And that the idea that we adapt to our circumstances, for example, if you experience something really positive, like winning Tats Lotto, or maybe it's something like getting married, maybe it might be getting a new job, maybe it might be getting a new car, for example, is that the impact of those pleasant or positive experiences certainly lifts our mood for a period of time. But after a period of time, and typically quite quickly, we actually adapt to or habituate to those pleasant experiences, and we return to that kind of original baseline of happiness or well-being.
That's so interesting. I mean, there's a book I'm reading at the moment which actually I think he puts a number on it. I think he says it's on average about 48 hours that's that feeling of satisfaction that you get from an extrinsic thing. He says it 48 hours. Yep. So it's like the thing that you've been looking forward to so much, and you finally buy the car or you finally get the job. That happiness feeling, doesn't matter how good it is, it on average goes down after about 48 hours.
Yep. Yeah. But interestingly, in terms of negative events, we do know that we take longer to adapt or return to our baseline.
That's
but
annoying.
After a period of time, that after a period of time that we do often return to that kind of baseline or pre-existing set point of well-being or happiness. And in part, I think that really reflects the negativity bias. And I'm sure you guys have spoken about that before, but the negativity bias being that from an evolutionary point of view, we are primed to notice the negative because that keeps us safe. And it's much like negative stuff is like Velcro and positive is like Teflon. The positive stuff just slips off. But we really pay very strong attention to the negative stuff.
Yeah,
so that's in
a classic example especially for people, and now for everyone really, on Instagram. It's that you could get 100 good comments, but you remember the one bad. All the positive ones, like, absolutely. Yeah, fine, that's good, okay, great. It's like, what? This guy says blah, blah, blah. And then you take that
Velcro.
Yeah, Velcro sticks for days. Yeah,
absolutely. And if you think about it, like back in caveman times, if you were focusing on the positive, like you were lying in the field and watching the clouds float by, then you are probably going to get chomped. It wouldn't pay for you to be.
Chomped is great.
Chomped
really good. Sounds quite pleasant, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, so it doesn't pay for you to be, or it didn't pay for us to be paying a lingering attention to those positive or pleasant experiences.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm saying is that, whether it's a positive event or a negative event, there is research to suggest that our levels of well-being or happiness tend to be fairly stable across the lifetime, which is really interesting because it then kind of brings into questions like, well, why bother? Like, why do you go to therapy, or why do we bother kind of thinking that we could change? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Or why bother? Why bother even like striving for things if the satisfaction's not going to even last very long? Yeah,
exactly. But what we know from the research is that there are ways that we can kind of shift that resting state, like much in the same way that you could shift your resting heart rate. I'm guessing, like with more exercise that you're doing.
Sorry, I so emphatically agree with that. It's because it's the exact analogy I was thinking in my head. So you saying that's amazing. It's exactly what I was thinking about. I've been paying very close attention to my resting heart rate of late, and then thinking like, do I have because I couldn't exercise for a month because I got sick. I was like, hang on, but it's gone back to what it was. What am I even bothering with this for? But then I've noticed now that I've got better, it's very quickly gone back to the more recent, fitter resting heart. Yeah, anyway, I agree. Sorry.
Yep.
Sorry. Jam, edit all that
out. There was some research done by Sonia Lubomirsky in the States, and she suggests that there are three main determinants of our kind of set point or our well-being. And the first is genetics. So obviously we don't have really kind of any control around our genetic or our kind of biology. The second is your environment. So that's really speaking to your circumstances. That includes things like your socioeconomic status, access to resources, the kind of parenting that you receive, the kind of social supports that you have. So that's environment. And then the third one is intentional activities. And that's where we have control.
Is there a percentage sort of breakdown about what has the biggest influence of those three?
Yep. So this was actually quite controversial research, and it's a little bit fraught. So I'm kind of hold this lightly, I guess. But she suggested that 50% of our well-being is determined by genetics. That 40% was determined by intentional activity, and only 10% by our environment.
Whoa, only 10%.
Yeah, and so like this is where I say like you have to be careful with this information. And she did make kind of a clarification around that, being that if your circumstances are basically all right.
Okay.
Yeah. So obviously if there's if there's not extreme trauma or extreme poverty, if you have kind of basic access to means and all those sorts of things, that her research was suggesting that it's only 10% that is determined by that, but that 40% is determined by what we can actually do.
I mean
which I think is
huge.
Yeah,
I mean it's great news if that's true. I think, isn't it? Isn't that like the fact that we have 40% control of our happiness?
We can control 40% of where we sit on like some kind of spectrum of well-being and happiness. And that's amazing.
But how much does our genetics influence our ability? Are they separate categories, or does our genetics influence our ability to act on the independent control?
I mean, I think that's a really good question, and we probably need to read to be honest.
Forget that.
But no, I think that's appropriate. And like, for example, if there is a history of depression in your family, then that might increase your vulnerability towards developing depression based upon your genetic history. But then it's also based upon how you were parented too, because if you had a parent that was depressed, then their ways of coping are modeled to you. So it's not necessarily just genetics in that circumstance. So I think that for me at least provides such a great sense of hopefulness around our capacity for change. And the fact that there are things that we can do. I think this is some really beautiful research done by Carol Dweck, again in the States, and she talks about a growth mindset. And this actually has a lot to do, I think, with with what Sam was expressing. And I actually wonder whether maybe it might be useful to play, his little excerpt, if that's possible. Just before you do, he's, in this particular excerpt, he's talking about kind of quite a pivotal moment where he meets Booty Barker. And so I'd encourage, obviously, people to listen to the episode. But there being this kind of moment of recognition, I suppose, of possibility, or a moment of hopefulness, I think.
Then Booty was just like, "No, you figure it out." And he looked at my brother and he said, "Here's the deal. Him and I, we're the same as you. We're just gonna have to drag ourselves around a little more." And since that day, I've lived by that expression of just, you find a way. You drag yourself around and you learn to enjoy and embrace the struggle, because believe it or not, there were the struggles before this as well. And I think when after that day, it was like, all right, we went home, and I remember that night, my brother and I, we got back to the hotel, and because we stayed up that way that night, and Booty had told us, that he just stayed in normal hotel rooms and he just gets himself in the bathtub. So there were me and Matt, we're like, let's try to get you in the bathtub. And it was like this new excitement of like, I'm going to learn to be independent. I'm going to learn to live my own life again.
I mean, Booty Barker, for those who haven't, it probably made sense listening to that, but Booty Barker was the first other person paraplegic that Sam had met who had this incredibly high spirit and will and
positive energy towards his towards his situation.
Yeah.
I thought it was such a powerful moment of his story, really, and really to me kind of represented what Carol Dweck terms as having a growth mindset. And a growth mindset is, kind of this belief, or really a kind of frame of reference that we have an ongoing, or like an infinite amount of possibility in terms of being able to change. Where as opposed to the notion of a fixed mindset, and so that's kind of having very fixed or rigid beliefs around my capacity to change, but also my capacity to learn and to grow. And there was some really, she gave this really great example of, I guess, having a growth mindset within education and school, and that she came across a high school in Chicago, that when they were giving out grades for their students, for the students that didn't pass those assignments, they graded it as not yet. Which I just thought, her example is just so beautiful.
Yeah. So many not yet I could have got.
Yeah. That is really powerful. That's amazing. Yeah.
And so she then kind of did, she talks a lot about this idea of the power of yet, because yet signals capacity for growth, for learning and for change. Whereas for kids that have, and for adults that have a fixed mindset, it often feels as though like the kind of thoughts that come up are like, well, why bother? Or bad things happened to me, or that was bad luck. Or good things that happen to me happen by chance, as opposed to good things that happen to me happen because I've worked for them, or I've, been persistent. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. Oh, it's making me totally rethink my NBA career. Not yet.
But I think in terms of, well, just to give you some further kind of evidence for the kind of the idea about a growth mindset. There was also some additional research which again looked at the brain, and I'm sorry for all my brain references, but
don't ever apologise for brain references. It is a weird thing to say. They're mind blowing.
Brain references are mind blowing. No, I mean, the brain does seem relatively important in the work you do, so I think it's probably on brand for you to reference it. So it's okay.
Good. Yeah. On trend. So when they did some brain imaging of kids when they encountered an error or made a mistake, and for the kids that had a growth mindset, their whole brain lit up. So like it was like massive activity everywhere. Whereas for the kids that had a fixed mindset, that really kind of bought into the sense of like, I'm a failure, I got this wrong, I can't do this, there was very little activity.
Oh, gosh.
So it was much less activity. And what the kind of interpretation of that is that when the kids with a growth mindset made an error, it prompted them to really reflect on what I need to do differently, how I made that error, how I could work through this problem, and then kind of moving, I guess, through to kind of like a sense of persistence around that.
Oh.
But for the kids that didn't have that belief, it really kind of was a really like shut down kind of experience, I suppose. I also think it's very normal for little kids in particular to focus on kind of like very concrete, like good or bad, right or wrong kind of concepts. So like the example that I was giving was kind of for older kids and probably in adolescents potentially. But what can you do to kind of facilitate a growth mindset? It's not just a belief that you say like, right, now I've got a growth mindset. It certainly takes some reflection and pausing. One of the things that Carol Dweck suggests is the importance of praising widely and specifically. So not saying things like, oh, well done, that was like, you did such a great job, but being actually more specific about the praise. And so praising the kind of like process orientation rather than a goal orientation.
So rather than just going like, you're such a good footballer, it's pinpointing a moment or the specific thing. Be specific, I guess.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. And again, kind of highlighting this difference between, and I see this a lot in students and I certainly did when I worked at in a tertiary sector. The issues around kind of perfectionism and it being a very strong goal, or like having a very strong goal orientation. So the goal is for me to get an HD as opposed to me learning. And that's where that kind of experience of praise comes in too, is that we're praising the process rather than praising the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
This is resonating so strongly with me. I'm having, I think I think we talked about on the Will McMahon episode.
Oh yeah,
about his experience going to an elite private school and the sort of the award and sort of prefect, the whole private school thing with like putting certain people on pedestals and you're either good or you're not, and it's all about the outcome. And took a long time. I've taken a very, very long time to try and undo that kind of way of thinking that personally. And it was actually resonated really strongly with something you said to me about a month ago, Ryan. Sorry, I'm looking at Ryan. When you were talking about how when you're creating exactly what we're doing with this podcast or in what I do in other work, where you are creating something that goes out into the world, flipping the idea that the end result and the content is king. You said the phrase to me, process is king.
Yeah.
And that if you make the process as enjoyable as possible and as fun and the best experience possible, then the end result will take care of itself. And the key point there for me was that you really spend 99.9% in the process. And you get that 0.1 of it when it's done, and then you move on to something else.
Yeah.
So making sure that time spent is the most positive, enjoyable possible. And I realised that now laying that over what Em's just been talking about is that's kind of flipping the thing of growth mindset. You're focusing on the process. Is that kind of what that is doing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I need to credit Gretchen Rubin for that. Like that was a book she wrote. She wrote a book called, I think it's called The Happiness Project or something. Have you ever read that, Em? Do you know that book? Yeah. She talks about it in terms of product, process over product.
Yeah.
And that idea that you spend pretty much all of your life in the process. So why are we focusing on the product?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it just layered so well over everything Em had just said then at all. It's all kind of coming together.
So Em, just to try and I think summarize what you've said and also Josh's anecdote there, is it like if that person is giving very specific praise for something, the next time, or if you keep doing that over a consistent basis, the next time that person or child happens to fail at something, there's more of a chance that more of their brain will kind of light up in that moment and see it as an opportunity rather than just a flat out failure. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of the intention of practice, obviously, is that we have to keep practicing that. And there's the old adage of neurons that fire together wire together. So this idea that we're really kind of laying the neural pathways for this to become a much more, default practice. But I mean, there are other things too that we can do in terms of, I guess, really facilitating a growth mindset, but also really stopping that like hedonistic adaptation, which I can go into now if you'd like me to do that.
Please.
Yeah.
So if you think about the idea of adaptation, or the idea of having kind of fixed beliefs, is this sense that things don't change, and it can be very, like, it's obviously a very rigid kind of style of thinking, and it's very oriented towards dichotomous thinking. So like things are good or bad, I'm right or wrong, I'm a failure or I'm a success. Does that make sense? Yep. We really kind of, in many ways, want to shift our attention away from this more rigid, inflexible way of thinking. And one of the ways in which we can do that is being more present. And again, I know I speak about this quite a lot, but if you think about adaptation, essentially it's like walking through life on automatic pilot. So a really great example of this is, you remember when you first learnt to drive a car, and how much attention was required to do that? And if I ask you now, like when you drove here today, how much attention did you give to the actual process of driving?
Absolutely zero.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Gee, that's worrying.
He had his driver.
Yeah. I couldn't tell, to be honest. I was on my phone the whole time. So no, but I totally, exactly. You don't think about it. Just it comes second nature and you're thinking about other things. Yeah.
And obviously that's really adaptive. We don't want to be having to have our full attention on tasks all the time. And so it's very adaptive that we can now drive with relative ease. But if we think about, for example, like, have you ever had the experience where you've driven home and you actually don't have any memory of driving home?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that is like habituation and adaptation. That is being on automatic pilot, right?
But adaptation essentially is adapting to something so much that it just becomes so second nature, sort of. Is
exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
Riding a bike. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
I mean, you said driving a car, same diff. Probably better example.
Or like, and I know we've used this example before, but it's like if you get a new car, that for the first like little period of time, like you were super psyched about being in the car, and maybe you noticed the smell of the new car, or like, the sound of the indicator. But then after a period of time, like you get into, when you get in the car, you don't even notice it anymore.
And that's hedonistic adaptation.
Yeah. And what, another way we can also look at that is like this idea of the treadmill. And that is that, when we adapt to that pleasant experience and then it returns to baseline, it's like you then need more. So then it's like, well, then I look for the next model of the new car, right? So we never stay satisfied or stay kind of happy with what we are receiving now.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so that's where kind of automatic pilot comes, is that we stop paying attention.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Can I ask a very specific question, and hopefully this isn't veering into the world of you being a psychologist, which you are definitely not. But it's material purchases have been brought up a bit here, and it's a really obvious one. I'm thinking of very specifically of a pan. What's it called? A cast iron.
Yep.
Cast iron pan, not very expensive. It's about $20 from a cheap shop. But the more I use it and the more I take care of it, the better it works. And I find using it the most satisfying. It was a once-off purchase, and it's so satisfying to use, and it cooks things well. And the better care I take of it, the better it gets. What's going on there that isn't going on when I buy a brand new camera and I use it a few times, and then I'm like, the feeling of excitement about it being used gone?
Your attention.
Okay.
So it sounds to me, I could be wrong, but it sounds to me as though when you use it, you're really present with that experience. And maybe, definitely. For example, when you're cleaning it, you're really paying attention to cleaning it.
Yeah, yeah, and because it's cast iron, you can't clean it the way you clean other pans. You got to be quite careful, and then re-season it afterwards and stuff.
Oh, you do that?
Yeah.
Oh, that's impressive.
It cooks so well now.
And the interesting thing about that is too that in that kind of deliberate attention, it also impacts memory. So, like for example, when you're 90, Josh, you're going to have really, I would imagine, really vivid memories and probably very nostalgic, lovely memories of that pan.
Probably. Yeah. In fact, knowing my mind, I definitely will.
Yeah. Whereas,
but like with a camera, and Josh, but with a camera, aren't you paying attention to using a camera as well? And you'd have to kind of pack that away in the right way. And
to be honest, a camera is probably the wrong example I should use, because a camera I can create things with, so that is probably a different thing.
Not meaning to undermine what you're saying. I'm just
saying a camera is probably the wrong thing to grab for, but like a new pair of shoes or a desirable slightly fancy purchase, like a laptop maybe is a better one.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry, Em. In the way.
But no, that's really interesting. So it's the attention and that you're present with the object.
Yeah. So it is our attention, and it doesn't have to be obviously just objects. A really very simple example of this is, if you're ever eating something that you really love, and like the first mouthful is so good. Do you ever have do you notice that? Yeah. And then like halfway through that, you might notice that you haven't actually really been paying attention, or it starts to just taste all the same. Do you ever notice that kind of experience?
Yeah. And
then maybe this isn't just me, but maybe when you get towards the end and you've got you notice you have like one mouthful or two mouthfuls left, you're like, God, why did I pay more attention to the middle part of the
that
bowl?
Starts to taste good again at the end.
Yeah.
This happened to me last night. That is the exact thing happened to me last night. Yeah.
Yep. And so really that is just an example of where the mind goes. Is that somewhere in that process we've lost contact with our present experience?
I get it now. I totally get that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Just had to mention food, and Hugh was on board. Oh yeah, eating. Yeah. Okay. So when you pay more attention to something, when you're more present with something, it becomes a more meaningful experience.
Yes, absolutely. So and these are the sorts of things. In some ways, it's like Rick Hansen, who I've mentioned before, he talks about it in terms of the notion of taking in the good, as opposed to our tendency, obviously, to pay attention to the bad or the unpleasant. And obviously, our senses are a really great gateway to paying attention. And this is why, and Ryan, we kind of spoke really briefly before this about like going on holidays. And holidays is such a great example, because particularly if you go to a new place, or a place that has kind of nostalgic memories, is that we're often very quickly drawn into our senses. So you notice like that you're pulled into the sights and the sounds and the tastes, and that those experiences then get laid down as memories. But
is that a bit like when you step off the plane somewhere, like I was in Cairns the other day and just stepped off the plane, and it was just the humidity just felt amazing. Like it was such a good feeling. And then the sight, you could see the mountains all across the horizon, and I just had this strong feeling of, and I was there for 4 days and it didn't wear off. Like the humidity constantly made me feel good. But I can imagine if you live there, you're not every day just going, how's the humidity today, and the mountains. Like you just become very much accustomed to it.
So you habituate. But initially in our kind of first exposure to certain experiences, new objects or new people, for example, we do get this kind of present moment focus. And I guess in terms of intentional activity, this is where, and I probably rabbit on about this far too much, but this is where mindfulness and gratitude really becomes really paramount. And the notion of play. And I know that may seem very odd to kind of suggest as adults. But I wonder for you guys, do you have a sense of why play would be relevant in terms of preventing adaptation?
Well, I don't know. I guess when you play, your mind is open to new things. Like I often think about, like what you were saying, Josh, before about process. When I'm filming something or making something with people, I often think about it in terms of like kids in a sandpit, where when kids play together not even in a sandpit, they could be out of the sandpit. But when kids play, it's not with any real, there's no real reason for it. It's not like, let's get together and play so we can then hopefully win this. I mean, obviously if they're playing sport, but if they're just like playing around the house, it's just for the fun of playing. They're completely in the moment playing, everything else fades away. And I often try and apply that sort of philosophy, I guess, to making things now, rather than going, oh, this is stressful, but that's okay because it's going to be worth it for the end product. Like, that's a horrible, I mean, to me, that's just like, well, that's not fun. So I guess when you're playing and you come at it with that mindset, for me, it allows you to open your mind and be more present in the moment and be more open to, if someone suggests something, go like, yeah, okay, let's do that, without being clouded by what your plan is for the end product, or what you're hoping, how you're trying to maybe subtly control the situation or move something in a direction that's going to benefit you in some way. Instead of doing that, it's like, because very rarely kids are, from what I know, I don't know, but like I can't imagine kids are trying to like leverage other kids into, they're just like playing. They're just like, let's just go with whatever's happening.
There's like focus and unpredictability kind of thing. The combo of the two.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how'd we go?
And it's inherently purposeless.
I don't quite get what you mean, to be honest. These two definitely have got it very quickly. But play, do you like?
Yeah. So I mean, like obviously as kids, like when you witness kids playing, there isn't necessarily a goal or an intention or a purpose with their play. They're just playing for play's sake, for connection, kind of really. But it's inherently purposeless. And I'm going to give you this is a really silly example, but I recently over Easter was out with my two young kids, and we had some kites which we'd never flown before, and I haven't flown a kite maybe for, I don't know, like 35 years.
Yeah.
And my poor 2-year-old daughter like didn't get a bar of it because I had the kite the whole time, and I was like, this is amazing. It's like, again, there was like no purpose to it. It felt so thrilling, which, I mean, people might be concerned about that. I would find that thrilling. But
no, I get it. I know it, yeah.
It was totally present moment focus, and you could potentially say maybe that's the state of flow, and flow and play I think really kind of overlap quite a lot, but it was inherently purposeless, and I can have, like right now, I have a very vivid memory of that experience because it required me to be so focused and also so much paying attention to what was happening.
Yeah.
So I always go to the practical thing of like how do we play as adults, but I asked Benji, my 5-year-old son, over dinner what he did with. I said to Benji, "What'd you do at Kinder?" And he said, "Me and my friend played a game, and you went on the monkey bars, and it's called 60-40. And if you're on the monkey bars and your friend said 60-40, you had to let go and fall down." And I said, "Was that fun?" He goes, "Very fun." He said he played it the whole lunchtime.
Yeah.
And then he said, "Do you have friends?" And I said, "Yes." And I had seen Ryan and Josh on that day, and he said, "What did you play?" And I said, "Well, adults don't really play when we see each other." But that's a bit sad.
I'd call this play.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
True.
Or even things like, I'm going to sound really super nerdy, and I don't think this is the right term, but like musicians jamming.
Yeah, but I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
Or like kick to kick in the park. There's nothing purposeful about that.
Yep.
Other than this experience of being, with each other. Or again, it might be like an artist doing art or being creative.
Yeah.
So there isn't
I get it.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a lot of, you often hear of people, adults, who have no interest in performing or being an actor or comedian or anything, and they'll go and do improv classes. And I imagine for this exact reason, because it kind of helps you to go with the flow, and to sort of, in improv, there's no way you can control it. You have to say yes. You can't block. And there's all these rules around improv. But I imagine, and that is why adults would do it, if just as an exercise in trying to be sort of present.
Yep, absolutely. And I mean, like that is an intentional activity that people have chosen that I'm sure really contributes to that sense of well-being.
Okay.
I have a friend actually who does singing lessons. And I actually asked her, I said, like, are you going to do a performance, or, what's the reason it's doing? She goes, I just love it.
Yeah, I love it.
She has singing lessons every week, and there's no goal or no intention. It is learning and joyful for her.
I mean, that is, I just love that so much, because I understand where it comes from. When people, like if you say to someone, I'm doing this thing, exactly what you're saying, Em, and the natural response is, oh, cool. So why why are you doing that all of a sudden? That's, you know, it's like there has to be a reason.
Yeah.
There has to be like this greater reason. Oh, okay, you're going to start charging for that? You're going to start, like, you know, like people who take photographs or paint, the common reaction is like, well, if you don't turn it into a career, it's a waste of time. But clearly what you're saying, the play aspect, it's far from a waste of time. It's extremely important.
Yep. And there's quite a bit of research around that. And I know, Hugh, you've spoken about flow, and it's a similar experience in kind of where you lose a sense of time, and that it's almost like things disappear a little bit, and you're very at one with what you're doing. That is one kind of intentional activity that we can do that can really kind of shift that stable set point of well-being or happiness. And so I can talk a little bit now in terms about like taking in the good and how that actually can kind of facilitate a growth mindset, but also really prevent, again, that kind of adaptation experience.
Yeah, because I feel like I speak a lot about this, but here comes the more intelligent, credentialed version of what I say.
So when we think about taking in the good, it's really kind of referring to this idea in some ways of savoring. And so if you think about, I don't know if I even just get you to all of you right now, just to think about the last pleasant experience you had, you know, whether that was an interaction with someone, maybe it was having a coffee, maybe it was going for a walk.
Mm-hmm.
And holding that in your mind, if I can get you to kind of breathe into that feeling in the body, so kind of like breathing into that memory in some ways, and just noticing what sensations are showing up in the body. So maybe there's a sensation of warmth, or maybe there's a lightness, maybe there's a tingling, or maybe no sensation at all. That's perfectly okay. It's really kind of breathing into that memory. So it's almost like you're expanding or enriching this memory, and perhaps noticing how your face might be feeling, noticing also if there's another person in this interaction, really kind of getting a sense of connection with them. So noticing how they're looking at you, or noticing sensations of touch. Really breathing into and expanding this kind of memory of something pleasant. Almost a little bit like you're kind of marinating in the pleasant experience. And then when you're ready, just coming back into the room. I don't know if any of you guys, it was a very, very short, simple exercise, but I don't know.
What year is it? What happened?
Very good.
That's so good. That is such a warm feeling.
Yeah,
it's so nice. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm.
Can I guess, did yours have something to do with Charlie?
It did.
Yeah.
I just saw him before.
Yep.
Yeah. What did you notice, Josh?
I noticed in my chest a kind of like heart pumping a little bit faster, but in a good way, like if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then like I couldn't help but smile, and then the smiling kind of overtook the rest of my body. And then I kind of felt like, because I'm a little bit stressed about a lot of stuff I've got going on, I kind of for a moment felt like, oh no, I can handle it all.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Just for a second.
Yeah, just had like a little window in to know, oh no, this is all going to be okay. You can deal with everything that's coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, it sort of feels like it's sort of fading into the distant. That feeling is kind of dissipating, and the reality of upcoming work and stuff is coming back. But it was a window into everything feeling great for a few seconds.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think there's a really kind of great example in some ways of our capacity to still hold and pay attention to the pleasant and to the things that are going well. And, you know, when like I used to run groups called Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy. It's a standardized 8-week group program for depression and anxiety primarily. And at the very beginning of that group, what we get people to do in the first week for their homework is to go home and to every day pay attention to pleasant events or pleasant experiences. And there are 3 key things that we pay attention to in that homework exercise. that are your thoughts that you notice when you're having that pleasant experience, the sensations that you experience in your body, and the feelings that are showing up. And it can be so minute. It can be things like I noticed a flower when I was walking to the car, for example. And, for people that are suffering from depression, it can feel like there aren't any pleasant events. And we can get really bogged down with the sense of heaviness and the kind of patterns of thought that tell us that there aren't any good things happening. But I guess, this kind of work is around really turning your attention to the fact that there are pleasant things that we can experience. And the more that you practice paying attention to those things, the more easily recalled they are. And also we get a far kind of broader experience or sense of our experience in the world. So it's not kind of, particularly when depression shows up, there's kind of like a narrowing of experience. But when we can pay attention to those more broad experiences, then it gives us a whole different kind of framework in some ways.
Awesome.
Really good. I love that activity so much.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Really good. Thank you for that. Next time I have a really tough morning with the kids, I might just give you a quick call and you can take Penny and I through that exact activity again. Thank you.
Can I just add, if we've got enough time, Hugh, you mentioned kind of briefly around the gratitude stuff, and you do genuinely know more about this than I do, so no. I don't want to pretend that. But one thing that I think that can be helpful in terms of gratitude is noticing how I feel grateful in the body. So again, it's like that other step of like expanding my kind of felt experience of feeling grateful. So it's not just like a cognitive aspect. It's not using kind of like that top-down approach, but like how do I feel? Like when we use that example of like remembering a pleasant event, how do I feel it in my body? And perhaps I feel a sense of warmth in my heart, or maybe it just feels a bit lighter. Does that kind of make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to back that up, I always feel energetic when I feel great with something. I have this energy inside me. So I know exactly what you mean.
Yep. Yep.
But it's really, what you're saying is it's really important to cognitively connect the two when you think of something you're grateful for, really notice what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's so easy that we can just say like, I'm so grateful for my family. And then it's just like slips right off.
Yeah.
But if we really sit with this experience and we can really recognize like, gosh, like there is a feeling of gratitude in here. And maybe there's like a feeling of warmth, and maybe there's a sense of lightness, or maybe there's a feeling like a feeling tone of it being pleasant, for example. That just makes that experience so much richer. And therefore really kind of integrating it into our whole experience. But this is it's a practice, and it takes a lot of deliberate, focused attention to do that.
But like it's sort of similar to what you said about focusing on the specifics when giving praise. It's like focusing on the specifics in your own experience, and like giving attention to the specifics of the everyday, the good things, even if they seem insignificant and they pass you by so quick. It's the focusing and the having gratitude, being mindful about that. Yeah.
And that really is like the stepping off of automatic pilot. Like it's stepping off autopilot and moving into like deliberate present moment focus. And of course, like I said before, there are times when it's really imperative that we are on automatic pilot. But the way in which we can kind of actively shift that set point in many ways is to notice that we can get off automatic pilot and we can be present with our experience. So it just becomes more expansive in some ways.
Yeah, I really like that point, because it feels like in the world that we live in, even though it might not be ideal, we can't really change a lot of it. So we can't really spend 24 hours a day in the slowing down. And there's things like the reality for a lot of people is that there's things to do and places to be. Yep. But the fact that you can switch between those, learning to switch between those modes, and that is a really beneficial thing to do is, I think, incredibly powerful. Yeah.
Love it, Em. Thank you so much.
Great to see
Amazing.
you. That was just, as always, brilliant, so helpful.
I want to use the word illuminating.
Yeah. Well, what we should be really doing is think of a specific thing that we really enjoyed about this episode.
And do it.
but it's just all been so good.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very kind.
Good talking him.
No, but I did actually, ironically, the bit where we did have to think about the moment of our day, that was a nice memory. That is so helpful. I mean, like you, I love practical things that I can like take away and like use, and I just know that I'll use that again because it just doesn't take very long at all, and it can be about the smallest thing.
Maybe I can just edit the audio of M doing it, and we can all have that bit of audio.
I was just about to say that we should get a grab of it, and then everyone can have just that.
Yeah, M doing a little.
It's a great idea.
Yeah. Just when someone's struggling, I go, God, I need to end myself here.
Need to end myself. Em's dropped her head.
No, do you know what I mean?
We'll work on the wording, but
Yeah.
I don't know if that's going to get through marketing and HR, but yeah, certainly think about it.
Definitely not HR.
Dr. M, again, so good to see you. Thanks so much.
Oh, it's
Thanks,
a pleasure.
Em.
Thanks again, as always. Having me.
See you soon.
See you soon.
If this episode has been triggering for you, we strongly recommend Lifeline on 131114. The Imperfects is hosted and co-produced by Hugh Van Cuylenberg, Brian Shelton and Josh Van Cuylenberg. This episode was produced by Bridget Northeast, edited by Jamison Moore, filmed by Andy Poole and social mediaed by George Martin. A special thanks to Dr. M for her expertise and guidance. We'd also like to thank the Resilience Project for their ongoing support. Our acknowledgement of country was delivered by Marley Silva, and you can find Marley's podcast Chicks and Balls on all the podcast platforms.